Wow, Christmas again already? Time sure is flying.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, yeah, you scared me. Is this gonna be a yearly thing?
I hope not.
SpongeBob?
SpongeBob!
In honor of the holiday spirit, my friend Scott and I are going to tell you the tale of how one of the biggest cartoons of all time came to be, SpongeBob SquarePants. Just wanting to share our love for the series and pay it tribute as the show was such an important part of our individual upbringings.
SpongeBob was always my favorite show as a kid. I feel like it was one of the most influential when it came to my creativity. When I was a child, I drew a lot and I conceptualized ideas for shows and movies I would make. And I would generally follow SpongeBob's formula when it came to writing, jokes, visual design, all of that. I didn't like doing pop culture references or too much gross out humor because those early seasons of SpongeBob did not do that unless it felt organic or it felt deserved. So many cartoons at the time relied too heavily on those things. And even as a child, I respected SpongeBob a lot for that. And I think that's what really made it stand apart when it came to its humor. Its humor was fully based on witty dialogue, character interaction. It was a show that I could show my parents and they would laugh at, they would understand, they understood the value of it. Whereas with other cartoons on Nickelodeon or other networks, it was much harder for them to get those. It was much harder for them to truly get behind those and say, yeah, that's funny. And it never felt patronizing. As a kid, it always felt like entertainment. It didn't feel like kids' entertainment. And I think that just shows how amazing those first 3 seasons are, because everything what I described those first 3 seasons are, because everything I described what SpongeBob wasn't was pretty much what it turned into after those few seasons. But I still stuck with it for a couple more years after its golden era was over. And while it's been a very long time since I've actually sat down and watched any newer episodes of the show, it is a show that will always remain in my heart as my childhood show.
For me, I was hooked right away. The first few seasons, which everyone will tell you were the best, truly are as good as you remember them. Almost every episode had quotable lines that I still say to this day. Heck, I can picture episodes of the show in my head like they are burned into my brain. SpongeBob always felt reliable. I think that's the right word I want to use there. It was always there and it was always delivering quality entertainment. But it was also one of those formative shows for me that helped me bond with other people as I grew up, having discussions with friends, having lifelong jokes because of the show. But it was really imaginative, really creative. You can think outside the box, or in this case, outside of the square. And while I'm no great artist or anything, it did get me into doodling. I had a big problem growing up in school where on all of my assignments, I would always just draw on them. And not gonna lie, a fair bit of them, aside from being that S that we all drew for some reason, was drawing characters from SpongeBob. I even remember creating my own fake little comic series of SpongeBob, my own little stories of SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, Plankton, Sandy. It just felt like there was something special about this show. But how did this influential show come to be the show that we all know and love it for today?
You're watching SpongeBob SquarePants. We'll be right back. You're watching SpongeBob SquarePants. We'll be right back.
SpongeBob SquarePants. No other introduction is truly needed. The long-running cartoon has been the bread and butter for Nickelodeon for the fishtail end of the 90s and has no signs of stopping anytime soon. Currently, it's on its 13th season with 3 theatrical movies and 2 spin-off shows. The SpongeBob brand could not be any stronger, putting aside any personal feelings you have towards things like the spin-offs. SpongeBob has always found a way to adapt and evolve since its early conception. But one thing that does seem to be consistent is the fact that adults now who grew up with SpongeBob still endlessly make references or quote jokes from the earlier seasons to a point you'd think our brain is 10% common knowledge, 90% SpongeBob jokes.
Your genius is showing.
Where?
Well, it seems that Nickelodeon has surely fallen into the, well, if it isn't a SpongeBob level success right away trap when giving new shows a try. There is no questioning the validity of why SpongeBob is their golden sponge for their network. It came together in an unconventional way and became one of the top earning franchises, one of the most notable franchises, and one of the most cherished franchises. If we head back to the 1980s, we take a look at Stephan Hillenburg, a man man who was in love with the ocean, a deep fascination and appreciation for the ecosystems under the sea. At the Orange County Marine Institute in California, Hillenburg was teaching marine biology. One of those days, he put together a comic book to help showcase the world within the Institute's tide pool as an aid to help the students understand the teachings a bit more.
The comic was called The Intertidal Zone, which would take a bunch of sea life and make them anthropomorphic, leading us to the first appearance of what would eventually become SpongeBob SquarePants, then named Bob the Sponge. From here, he tried to see if he could pitch this idea to be a published comic, as he did minor in art in college while majoring in marine biology. Unfortunately, things didn't seem to go anywhere with that, but it did change his direction in life, finding a lot more enjoyment in creating the comic, leading him back to school to work towards a master's in animation specifically. He wanted to take the risk with another one of his passions. Once he acquired his master's, he would end up connecting with Joe Murray, the creator of the cartoon Rocko's Modern Life, and they seemed to really hit it off, with Hillenburg receiving a job offer and quickly joined on to fill many different positions, from writing to directing to being a storyboard artist and much more. One of the voice actors on the show, Tom Kenny, who played Hef, would quickly become good friends with Hillenburg, immediately knowing that if Bob the Sponge would ever become a reality, that Tom Kenny is the perfect voice of the character. It was that definitive moment where the magic of SpongeBob started coming together. Their communications about this went further as Hillenburg was fully fleshing out the development of this Sponge character, and it was not even half a minute until after Hillenburg's description of what he was thinking the character would be like that Tom Kenny found the perfect voice.
One thing that every show has to keep everything in order for the characters, world, and ideas for the show is a Bible. That's the terminology used, as for anyone working on the show must follow the pre-established rules set within it. Hillenburg would spend countless amounts of time developing it once Rocko's Modern Life would finish its run on Nickelodeon. Bob the Sponge would start to change into what SpongeBob would be, especially in the look of the character, as the common person would think of a sponge more like a typical dishwashing one rather than their natural sea look. As when you hear the word sponge, it's safe to assume people think of this rather than this, unless you're a marine biologist, of course. All of this formed together to create the final concept of his creation. Yup. Sponge Boy. Okay, maybe not the final, but that was the next name for SpongeBob, with the show's current title at this time being Sponge Boy Ahoy.
Things were going well, and they had just finished recording the voice work for the short for Sponge Boy Ahoy, only to right after find out that that name is a no-go because of a mop-related product on the market with the same name. Or was there a mop? Yeah, what are the chances? But Hillenburg wasn't too distraught from this. He knew that whatever the name comes out to be, the word sponge needs to be involved. Some time had passed, a few discussions were had, and it was determined that the name SpongeBob would be the best fit. Heck, that sounds more like a name than Sponge Boy, which sounds more like you're describing him. But where did the last name come from? The iconic SquarePants. It literally came from a random side comment from none other than Tom Kenny, who said, "Boy, look at this sponge in square pants." As if the light bulb went on and exploded above his head, Hillenburg loved the sound of SpongeBob SquarePants. It was just the perfect way to understand this sponge character that you're looking at.
In 1997, he brought the full pitch to Nickelodeon, having the connection to do so thanks to his work on Rocko's Modern Life. While the art of pitching by many who have gone through state that you really need to keep it simple, the base idea and concept, plus some sort of visual aid to sell what your vision is. In most cases, more than this rarely turns out in the pitcher's creation moving forward with the network they pitched it to. But Hillenburg is not your average fella. He has been putting his all into this, and surely was gonna show it all off. For one, a visual aid he had was a smaller replica of what Bikini Bottom looks like, all inside of an aquarium. And yes, there were even characters there as well. Along with Hillenburg on this pitch was Derek Dryman, someone he had met working on Rocko's Modern Life. At that time, he was working as a storyboard artist on the show when he caught wind of Hillenburg's ideas and wanted in.
As well as Nick Jennings, who would jump aboard, who would be crucial to bringing SpongeBob to life, now together at the pitch wearing some Hawaiian shirts, making a statement as they entered the room with Hawaiian music as their backing track. All of this ended up in a success as everyone involved in this pitch meeting was thrilled with the idea of the show. Literally, some executives had to take a moment to regain their composure from how funny SpongeBob could be. In the end, it wasn't a "we'll give you a call back" vibe. Instead, only moments later, Nickelodeon told them that they want their show, and the pilot was greenlit on the spot. The pilot episode, Help Wanted, would eventually be created, and it performed so well at the executive screening that they wanted to repeatedly watch it over and over, describing it as something they've never seen before. It had charm, it was funny, and it would have the same impact on adults adults to an extent that it would also have on their kid viewership. Now it was going to prime time, becoming the network's first Saturday morning cartoon, airing a preview of the show on May 1st, 1999, and eventually fully premiering on July 17th, 1999. The reviews of the show were really high and majority positive. The viewership was quickly growing, and by the time you blinked, it was a success. By 3 years in, the viewership was beyond 60 million. But what really made the show different on the back end of the network was the portion of the viewership that were adults. Over 20 million of those viewers were in the 18+ demographic. For a cartoon, as an adult who enjoys cartoons, SpongeBob was helping prove to the networks as well as naysayers that cartoons are a medium to tell stories, not just something to keep kids entertained for a chunk of time. At this time in 2002, Hillenburg took his focus from the show and pointed it towards the theatrical movie that Nickelodeon wanted to create. This would cause a problem on the show as he only wanted to focus on one project and not both the show and the movie. Plus, he figured that since he had already delivered them 60 episodes, it's about on par with what most cartoons' life cycles are. Little did he know the future the show would have. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie would premiere in November of 2004, grossing $141 million on a budget of $30 million, making it a huge financial success, and the reviews from critics and fans of SpongeBob were both pretty positive. I mean, I know for me, the SpongeBob movie was a pretty massive moment as a kid being a fan of the show.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like they really took the essence of who SpongeBob was as a character and they effectively turned it into a full feature film, giving each character way more depth while also making them still feel like the characters from the show. Taking all these guys and putting them in this life or death situation that's actually being taken seriously, but still maintaining that level of SpongeBob wackiness and fun is really impressive, and it shows that Hillenburg understood these characters to a T. He wasn't gonna do a movie just to do a movie. He wanted to do a movie when it felt right, when it felt like he had something to do with these characters on the big screen that you couldn't do in an 11-minute or 22-minute episode.
But Mr. Krabs...
Cheers for SpongeBob!
Now back to SpongeBob SquarePants. Now back to SpongeBob SquarePants.
After this, Hillenburg wanted to end SpongeBob, not make it too much of a good thing. But of course, with a series this popular and this valuable, Nickelodeon wasn't gonna be on board for that. Hillenburg stated though that, "I think Nickelodeon executives respect that my contribution is important. I think they would want to maintain the original concept of quality." This disagreement about continuing with the show led to Hillenburg stepping away as showrunner, leaving Paul Tibbitt to take over. Hillenburg would still serve as a base executive producer role, helping advise where and when needed while still having an eye on each completed episode. But this really was his retirement from the property, spending time reconnecting with his love of the sea. SpongeBob at this point would hit its middle years for about a decade without Hillenburg there, with a lot of fans finding a good chunk of episodes to not be as good at best or just plain bad at worst. Again, personal opinions definitely come into play there.
But in 2014, it was announced that Hillenburg would be coming back to SpongeBob. Tibbitt and Hillenburg worked together on the second SpongeBob theatrical movie titled Sponge Out of Water that came out in 2015. Still one of the coolest Blu-ray releases ever right here. Heck, even check out this steelbook. It also was a huge financial win as well, making $325 million on around a $70 million budget. Also receiving pretty decent reviews as well, as it even became the second highest grossing film that was based on an animated TV show, just behind the Simpsons movie. Doing the film led to Hillenburg really wanting to come back to the show. As it had been going on for so long, there was definitely room for some creative help to come up with new ideas and tell stories. However, not too long into his return, he put out an announcement in 2017 regarding his diagnosis of ALS, a neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the spinal cord in the brain. He commented on this not affecting his want and passion to work on SpongeBob as long as he can. Sadly, however, on November 26, 2018, Stephan Hillenburg would pass away from the disease at the age of 57, and his ashes were scattered into the Pacific Ocean as a tribute to what inspired his whole career, from marine biology to the animation field. While SpongeBob would continue on, Hillenburg's legacy would as well, having the episode of SpongeBob, SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, as well as the third SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, being both dedicated to him and everything he helped create. And while the full performance of Sweet Victory from the Band Geeks episode wasn't played during the Super Bowl, it was at least nice to somewhat see it incorporated as it then would transition into sicko mode.
The arena itself would put out a video of the full performance of Sweet Victory playing on the screens, but it was when there was not a soul in the arena. While the gesture was nice, one day I hope that the actual performance is just Sweet Victory. Despite some helpful guidelines and rules to follow to carry on the SpongeBob franchise, the series would continue on and is today worth over $13 billion.
In the end, SpongeBob SquarePants would continue to go on, paving ways for newer generations of watchers to enjoy. While the show itself has gone through a lot of changes over the years, most notably being the look of SpongeBob slightly being tweaked here and there, it still is able to maintain that special charm for someone. Even if the newer stuff isn't for you, or the older stuff doesn't pique your interest over the animation and stories of the newer stuff, SpongeBob at this point is eternal. It's proven that the show can stand the test of time. Beyond that, having its own different success with other animation ventures like the movies, the Patrick Star spin-off show, and the Camp Coral spin-off show. There's a SpongeBob for everyone, an era of SpongeBob for everyone, and I think that's kind of beautiful. The series has continued to merchandise the franchise, as well as still pumping out strong into the gaming industry, with a recent remake of Battle for Bikini Bottom and now the upcoming Cosmic Shake video game.
The level of animation quality found in newer episodes of SpongeBob is seriously on another level. While comparing back to classic era SpongeBob, there's a distinct difference in tone the show has because of it. While things are still silly, fun, and often lighthearted, the newer stuff really hit full gear on playing into internet memes and creepypasta. Some animation that I can't explain how this is a thing I'm looking at in a cartoon right now, and the slight evolution of characters' personalities. While the spin-off shows may flanderize that last aspect a bit, the main core SpongeBob traits, for the most part, are able to stay truer to what they've always been. Just sometimes Patrick's a jerk for no reason, which seems to stick out the most. He was more of the not-so-smart but loyal friend to SpongeBob, but in more recent years has had these moments of either just straight up being a bad friend to SpongeBob or being mean for the sake of being mean.
SpongeBob is generational, but putting on any episode from any time really brings you back to warm fuzzy feelings, that nostalgia of the first time watching the show, the first time seeing the TV specials, the movies, and of course, the video games. That's another aspect of my love for SpongeBob that I hope to touch upon soon over on my gaming channel, Jordan Fringe Gaming. I have been and always will be a fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. Stephan Hillenburg truly created something I don't think he even imagined becoming so beloved and ingrained into society and the cultural zeitgeist, reaching heights way larger than the network that owns it. You were a beacon of inspiration for many generations. You were a kind person who wanted to share your love of the sea and what's in it. You opened the possibilities of people caring more about marine biology and pursuing that career path, equally as much for animation. I have friends now that are in the animation industry that currently work on newer SpongeBob episodes, and what brought them to this point was their love for the show you created when they were younger. All over the world, people care about SpongeBob, and that's all thanks to you, taking the chance to share your love of the sea in a way that both kids and adults can attach themselves to. Thank you for everything, Mr. Hillenburg. Well, that's another Fringemas.
It was the most Fringemas someone who celebrates Christmas could ask for.
Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate you stopping by.
Of course. Always a pleasure.
So is this like a yearly tradition now? Will I see you again next year?
Yeah, you sure will, bud.
Really?
No.